fantasy football.
Every year I set this league up and I never win.
All right, pick the draft order and get things going.
Make the call.
Don't talk to me like I'm an idiot.
This is the best day of my life!
It is Football 1 NFL Talk here at Hale Martin Club. What a day it is, Cam. What do you think? Sunday football, pretty exciting.
Oh yeah, I am pumped for it.
Cam's not much of a footballer.
I'm a footballer. I just, tend to follow just one team.
Oh, Andrew Rogers here with you. That's Cam Broham, and Sausha Durkin is out on remote. Her son is dealing with an illness of some kind. He's probably got the stomach bug, knowing that his mom is going to lose in fantasy football this week. And because of all of that, we just got a note from her. Because of all of that, she's going to be struggling. But her son's carrying the weight of Sausha this week, and I'm a little saddened by that. But Sausha, we'll see you soon. God bless fantasy football week 1. As I said, there are many things a man can do at this time, but none are better than this. And let's get right into it. Steelers, Bengals at noon. We'll go with the noon slate. We'll fall into the 3:30s and then head into Sunday night football before we get into Monday action. Also, send over your start-sit questions. We've already had a few come through. So if you have any questions about who I need to start 30 minutes till kickoff, I'm your man. I can help you out, give you the stats, give you the numbers, and we'll move on from there. Steelers, Bengals seeking to win consecutive division titles. On the other end of the ball, Mitch Trubisky getting the starting job, and he's going to ball out this year. Mitchell Trubisky is going to go nuts this year. Pittsburgh seeking its 3rd straight season opening win. Now, Cincinnati gave up the 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers last season. The Bengals defense gave up 238.4 passing yards per game in 2021. That was the 7th highest total in the league. So what does that mean? That means the Steeler receivers are going to get fed, and Mitchell Trubisky will do his job. Deontay Johnson is one of my favorite plays this week. He saw double-digit targets in all but 4 games last year. He is healthy. He will play. Will he be limited? I don't really think so. Deontay Johnson has proven to play through injury before, and he's going to be a must start for me in all fantasy lineups. Chase Claypool, another one, because he's 6'4" and he's playing in the slot now. So talk about bounce back season alert on him. Joe Burrow feeling really good, too, for the Cincinnati Bengals. He had over 4,600 passing yards last year, 34 touchdowns. But since 2020, he's been sacked 102 times. What does that mean? Well, the Bengals go out and just rework their entire line. So 4 out of the 5 are newbies on this starting offensive line. And take into account, they're facing off against TJ Watt. He was the defensive player of the year last year, but Joe Burrow is still somebody that can create plays. We saw it last year, and he'll do the same thing here. Pittsburgh gave up the 15th most fantasy points to wide receivers last season. That is 215 passing yards per game, which was the 9th lowest total. But how about on the contrary? 7th most fantasy points to running backs last year makes Joe Mixon a must start. He's one of my favorite plays as well, since he needed to run the ball last year to get by Pittsburgh, especially the second time they played, and they'll need to do it again. 49ers Bears is another game in that noon slate. The Bears, one of the lowest, if not the lowest rated defense this year, and that is shocking after this team was one of the best just a decade ago. The 49ers are one of the best defenses in the NFL, though, which makes this a very lopsided matchup. But take that weather into account in Chicago today. It's very rainy, very wet. We saw George Kittle was already ruled out, and rightfully so. He's dealing with that groin injury, and you don't even want to push a groin injury on a wet surface. So here's what's going on in the secondary for the Bears. They're starting 2 rookies, which leads to more growing pains. They also gave up the 6th most fantasy points to team defenses last year. So where does that leave me here? I'm looking at the wide receiving core for the 49ers, and I'm thinking, okay, Deebo Samuel, 6 receptions, 171 yards last year against the Chicago Bears. I like that. I don't know who wouldn't like that. Brandon Ayuk, one of those other guys that didn't have a great second season. He had more of an average season. But Brandon Ayuk is a guy that they've been talking about a lot, getting those targets. with George Kittle out, I see Brandon Ayuk stepping up in a big way today, and the Trey Lance era is upon us. And Trey Lance loves Brandon Ayuk. Deebo Samuel has fit in too. Trey Lance, he's got all the characteristics of Mahomes and Kyler Murray. I know he's not those guys yet, and I'm making such a bold claim by saying that, but this is a guy that has elite mobility and an impressive arm on him. Screw the haters. Screw what anybody else says. Trey Lance is going to be a guy that will stay in the NFL for a long period of time. He'll take his coat off and stay a while, as my dad would always tell me to do when I go home. But Trey Lance may not have the best performance today. He played in a dome his entire career at North Dakota State in college. So the ground game may have more firepower here, which means Elijah Mitchell will get a lot of looks. I think he'll repeat his 137-yard and 1 touchdown performance. He totaled 1,100 yards in just 11 games, playing through multiple injuries as a rookie. So I'm not too worried about him. Now, in Justin Fields' case, he's in year 2. He doesn't have a strong defense to back him. He still has a juggle of an offensive line. So what is Justin Fields going to do this year other than scramble and try to make plays, which is what we've seen him do his entire career so far? I think that means he's going to pepper the short game a little bit more, whether that's balls out of the backfield for Khalil Herbert, maybe David Montgomery every now and then, but even Cole Kmet, he can be boosted in PPR formats this week. He's projected to get 8+ targets. One of Chi-Town's best pass catchers, too. You have Darnell Mooney, you have Cole Kmet. Those are the two guys without A-Rob there now that are going to see most of the share. So I like Cole Kmet today. If you had George Kittle on your team, if Cole Kmet's unowned, first off, if you had George Kittle on your team and you're looking for a replacement, look to bring in Cole Kmet, because in the wet field conditions, there's not going to be a lot of balls thrown downfield. You may get a lot of checkdowns. Cole Kmet will be your guy there. Eagles-Lions, a very favorable matchup for Eagles fantasy owners. The Lions were a bottom 5 defense in passing yards per attempt allowed, passing touchdowns allowed, rushing yards allowed, and rushing touchdowns allowed in 2021. Safe to say the Lions defense wasn't very good. Eagles running backs don't really know what to think of Miles Sanders just yet. After his rookie season, he set himself up to really be in a good position to succeed. But since then, not so much. He was dealing with some injuries there too, but Detroit's defense did yield the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs last season. I like Sanders as a flex play today. I'd also gamble on Kenneth Gainwell. He's a guy that I've been high on, especially during draft boards, if you could get him around the 10 to 12 range. But Kenneth Gainwell may see a lot of checkdowns from Jalen Hurts as well. So if they're not throwing the ball deeply down the field, you may see a lot of production out of the Eagles running backs. Now, A.J. Brown, of course, is the biggest addition for the Eagles in this matchup. But what does that mean for Devontae Smith? Well, Devontae Smith nearly amassed 1,000 yards receiving as a rookie. Okay. Also a Heisman Trophy winner in college, so you know that he has the star power to be a great in the NFL. Both wideouts should be able to roam rather freely in this matchup. This Lions defense is suspect. Allowed 31 passing touchdowns in 2021, which was tied for 26th in the NFL. I don't think they're going to have any issue throwing the ball today, especially in the covered conditions. You also have Dallas Goedert, who the Lions allowed the 2nd most receiving yards in the NFL to tight ends in 2021. He went for 6 and 72 last year. He's a must-start play this week. Jalen Hurts only threw the ball 103 yards in that game. So if you can imagine, Dallas Goedert should also have a big role today. On the other side of the ball, Jared Goff played far better at home last season, so the Lions could put up a fight. My partner in crime over at the office, Anna Bellinghausen, loves the Detroit Lions. She thinks they're going to make a case in the NFL North this year. She also loves the Vikings. She also doesn't mind the Bears. She just hates the Packers. So I don't know how much we really want to bleed into that conversation. But the Eagles are a tough matchup, having allowed the 2nd fewest fantasy points to outside receivers last season. It makes Amon-Ra St. Brown an easy start this week for me. He is labeled as the worst start of the week by a lot of analysts, which makes him like a complete curveball for me, because I am on the other mountain. He ran around 80% of his routes from the slot last year, and that is going to be much needed for somebody that is seeing a defense where outside receivers didn't succeed. So I like him, and I also like TJ Hawkinson. The Eagles allowed the most receptions, receiving touchdowns, and fantasy points to the tight end position in 2021. TJ Hawkinson went for 10 catches, 89 yards last year. Some really good players in this matchup. It may not be the most intriguing one to watch on TV, but you're looking at players when you're looking at your fantasy lineup. A lot of these guys are starters and top end starters for your team. So I really look forward to this matchup. Patriots Dolphins, another one. Tua Tagovailoa now has all the weapons needed to succeed, and not just in the NFL and in fantasy football, but he might have a slow start to the season facing off against Bill Belichick's defense. The Patriots allowed the second fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks in 2021, and Tua averaged just 14.2 fantasy points per game in those two matchups against the Patriots last season. So even though he has Tyreek Hill now, even though he has Jalen Waddle back again, of course, you have Mike Gesicki, which they're actually talking about using him more as a blocker this year. You have the addition of Chase Edmonds in the backfield that can put up a few different looks for this team. I still think when you're looking at this matchup, you have to favor the Dolphins. I know that the Patriots defense is good. I know people are high on Bill Belichick, and why wouldn't you be? He is a Hall of Fame head coach. But the way I look at how everything is put together for both of these teams, I like the way the Dolphins have shaped up more. Now, I mentioned Gesicki. I don't like him this week. So if you have Mike Gesicki on your team, make sure to put him on the bench. He's a fantasy tight end 8 in PPR last season. And like I said, a lot of talks about him being a blocker. Patriots allowed the fewest fantasy points to the tight end position last season. Just avoid Mike Gesicki at all costs. Just avoid him. Chase Edmonds, though, is somebody I really like. The Dolphins had a 100-yard rushing performance in each of their past 2 home games against New England, and you can get uber creative with this guy, opposed to Raheem Mostert. There may be a little bit of a timeshare there, but Chase Edmonds is going to get the start, and he can do more than Raheem Mostert can do. Raheem Mostert may be better at punching through those holes, but Chase Edmonds can be a more versatile back, and that's something you like to do against a great-minded head coach in Bill Belichick. You want to give as many different looks as you can. New England also allowed the 8th most catches to running backs last year, which means Chase Edmonds will be the guy that gets fed today. One of the biggest start-sit questions I've received is around Ramondre Stevenson. I would fade Stevenson this week, and that's against a lot of analytics, but even though his efficiency was solid last year, Damian Harris was a solid fantasy player too. And especially against Miami, he totaled 34 carries for 137 yards and 1 rushing score. He added 6 receptions for 53 yards. That makes him a borderline flex play today. So if I get those numbers again, Stevenson may not be seeing the field all that much. So that's why I like to fade him. Now, go against me if you want. If you choose, I don't really care. That's how I look at it. I look at the numbers. I look at last season. I put it back all together, and I'm going with Damian Harris. Let's look at some more start-sit questions, and then we'll get more into the NFL slate for today. Some quick ones as we're seeing them come through. Start-sit. Start 1. A.J. Dillon. Okay. Chase Edmonds, Miles Sanders, half-point PPR. I just got done talking about Chase Edmonds, so I think I'm going to stick with that. As much as Chase Edmonds can be involved in the reception part of the game, I'm going to go with starting Chase Edmonds. I think a close second is A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon, one of my favorite fantasy players this year, looked at in that 1A tandem up in Green Bay. And A.J. Dillon, I think will be productive today too. I think he finds his way into the end zone. No Devontae Adams, as a reminder to those that don't really follow along with football and are just sitting down today to watch the slate and are like, oh, what team is he playing on? He is on the Las Vegas Raiders now. So A.J. Dillon will be productive. There's no Allen Lazard. Robert Tonyan's back from injury, but who knows how limited he will be. You have Dubes, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, and Sammy Watkins. Obviously, rookies, question marks, and then you have Sammy Watkins, who has been recycled all throughout the NFL, can't find his way on a NFL roster and solidify his spot after breaking out with the Buffalo Bills when he was first drafted in the first round. So I like Chase Edmonds this week. Start 2 in half PPR, Michael Thomas, Deontay Johnson, Damian Pierce. I'd say Michael Thomas and Deontay Johnson. Michael Thomas, I know that hamstring injury is lingering, but he is still one of the best receivers in the NFL and will be with Jameis Winston. Deontay Johnson is also interesting to me. We already talked about the Steelers a little bit. I'm just not big on Damian Pierce this week, so I would start those two. Dubes or Watson? Got this question earlier today. I would go with Dubes. Dubes. I think it's Dubes. Cam, what do you think?
Dude, sounds good to me.
Dubes. All right, that's what we're going to stick with that.
We're going with.
Yeah. The reason I'm going with Dubes is solely because he's seen more time in training camp and in preseason than Watson did. Watson, of course, was injured for most of that time. So I'm going to go with somebody that has a little more repetition there. Aaron Jones, Travis Etienne, DeAndre Swift, start, bench, half point, sit, full PPR. This is a weird question. Okay, out of those three, I'm start, bench, sit, bench. Oh, the bench is half points. Okay, that's what I'm understanding now. So I have to sit one of them. Well, if I'm sitting anybody, I'm sitting ETN. I'm starting DeAndre Swift for sure, and I guess I would bench Aaron Jones. Well, maybe not. Let me do a little more digging here. So DeAndre Swift's in an interesting spot. He's facing a defense that gave up the 10th most fantasy points to running backs last season. His involvement gives him a seemingly stable floor with more upside than Aaron Jones, I think. I'd go DeAndre Swift. I would start him. I like the position that he's in more. The Vikings defense, you never really know what you're going to get with them. But for the most part, they've always been solid ever since making a break in the NFL playoffs just years ago. I'd go with DeAndre Swift. I would bench half points with Aaron Jones, and I would sit Travis Etienne. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. Last one, and then we'll get back into more matchups. Kareem Hunt or Ramondre Stevenson, half point PPR, and then Melvin Gordon or Treylon Burks for a flex at a full point PPR. You know, I'm actually going to do something completely different here. I'm going to remove Hunt and Stevenson. I'm not really big on either of them this week. I know Kareem Hunt is in a tough matchup, especially with Nick Chubb. I mean, the Panthers allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points in the NFL to running backs in 2021. Nick Chubb will be the guy that gets it on the ground, but how often are they going to be checking down to Kareem Hunt? I know Kareem Hunt can also run straight down the field as well, but I'd probably say I'm going to start Melvin Gordon in half PPR. I like his positioning, even with Javonte Williams against the Seahawks. If you look at that matchup just a little bit deeper, the Seahawks allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs. They allowed 10 different running backs to have 20-plus fantasy points against them last season. And the Broncos should have no problem getting an early lead in this game, which would allow them to feed both of these running backs. And they may even venture to sit Javonte and give more reps to Melvin. So I'd probably start Melvin and then put Burks in my flex. I think Burks is an ultimate sleeper this year. Burks, this week even especially, could be a big sleeper. One of my favorites. I mean, Robert Woods obviously slated as the number 1 receiver, but the Titans haven't given up on Burks, who has been stated to be featured prominently in the past game. The Titans gave Burks extra reps this postseason. They played him deep into games, all in a venture to speed him up, and I think he's ready to go. So I you know what? Screw it. Put the rookie out there. Let me see what he does this week. Back to more noon matchups. I left off at Browns-Panthers. 2 biggest notes. Jacoby Brissett is the 33rd starting quarterback since 1999 for the Cleveland Browns. That's not a lot. That's not a lot. McCaffrey, when healthy on the other side of the ball, averaged roughly 26 points. And notice how I said when healthy, because I traded for McCaffrey in a dynasty league 2 years ago, and I maybe have gotten 5 games out of this guy. And I traded a complete haul of athletes just to put him on my team, and I've gotten 5 games. Traded away Derrick Henry. That was one in that trade. So hasn't been my biggest achievement when it comes to fantasy football. Panthers defense, I already mentioned how they've allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points in the NFL to running backs. So and not too high on Kareem Hunt. I'd still give Nick Chubb a spot in your starting lineup. He's a running back 2, a borderline running back 1 this week still. I still like Amari Cooper today. He should see a lot of targets this season as he is by far the most talented receiver on that core. The Panthers allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points in the NFL to wide receivers last season. Plus, they will be getting back their 2021 first-round pick. But you can run the ball the whole time with a great defense, but you still have to spread the ball around. So that's why I like to give Amari Cooper a look today. To me, he's the only guy that really deserves a chance out there. But think about who's back to prove a point. Baker Mayfield. He's back. Cleveland gave up the 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers last season, so he'll be forced to spread the ball around a little bit more. I still like DJ Moore a lot today, but, I mean, you can dump the ball off to Christian McCaffrey, and he can make some noise. I like the Panthers in this matchup. Colts-Texans. I love the Texans receivers in this matchup, and here's why. So the Colts outscored the Texans 62-3 over their last 2 meetings. Yes, it is laughable. Indianapolis gave up the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers, though, last season. So when I look at a 1,000-yard receiver like Brandon Cooks, and I look at a guy that has huge upside in Nico Collins, why not start either of those two in this matchup? They have to throw the ball to win. They have to throw the ball to be competitive, and they won't be running the ball all that much, which is why, even though he's one of my favorite rookie running backs this year, I'm fading Dameon Pierce because Houston will be forced to throw the ball more. Plus, the Colts limited opponents to 109 rushing yards per game last season. That's the 4th fewest fantasy points to running backs. Another guy I'm keeping my eyes on, and I might as well call this Pierce squared, is Alec Pierce. Houston gave up the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers last season. He will be an instant threat. Kind of like when Michael Pittman made it into the league, paired up with T.Y. Hilton. I really like the addition of Alec Pierce. He's a big body, and Matt Ryan loves big bodies on the outside. We saw that with Julio Jones, and we don't really know where the rookie corner is going to be. Is he going to be on Pierce? Is he going to be on Pittman? Of course, he was the 3rd overall pick in the draft. But if he's on Pittman, I like Pierce. If he's on Pierce, well, Pittman's starting anyway, and I don't think anybody would ever do that. So in this matchup, Colts will obviously win. I can even see the Colts covering here, but I like the Texans receivers more than anybody else. Saints defense is a for sure reason why they're going to beat the Falcons this afternoon. Marcus Mariota, nothing to brag about. There's nothing to be made of the Falcon running game, so I'm not overly worried about Marcus Mariota taking off either. Pitts will get his targets. I'd like to see if Drake London is actually the guy people are expecting him to be, and that's about it with that team because the Falcons defense is also nothing to brag about. Falcons gave up the 4th most points in the NFL. You have a revamped Michael Thomas. You have Chris Olave as well, and there's just really not much to expect from these teams in any sort of fantasy outlook. Ravens Jets, kind of a bit of the same way. You have Lamar Jackson, who declined his 6-year offer. The strength of the Jets is their defensive line. However, they struggled against the run last year. So makes Kenyon Drake an interesting play for anybody out there that either has J.K. Dobbins or needs a surefire flex play. I like Kenyon Drake today. Michael Carter and Breece Hall, if you're going to play either, you play Michael Carter. But I still don't like him. Baltimore's defense gave up 84.5 rushing yards per game. That was the lowest total in the NFL last season. I like Rashad Bateman. There's new members of the secondary. He'll obviously get the number 1 corner, but the Jets defense gave up over 250 passing yards last season, which was the 3rd most in the league. And now, where the Jets can possibly find rhythm is at the wide receiver position. Elijah Moore is an interesting play. The Baltimore defense gave up 278 passing yards per game, which was the highest total last year. And that gives Garrett Wilson some flyer value as well. As we kind of wrap up toward the start of kickoff today, let's get to more of your start-sit questions, and I'll quickly go through the rest of the games. So, Pierce or Penny? Non-PPR, easy one. Rashad Penny, he led all categories for running backs last year after week 14. And if you don't believe me, here you go. He rushed for at least 135 yards and a touchdown in 4 of Seattle's last 5 games last year. He'll look to pick up right where he left off. Moving forward down the list, let's go to, I like this one, Kirk Cousins or Zach Wilson. I like Kirk Cousins. He's going to be throwing the ball a lot against this defense. Dalvin Cook will get his looks, but with the options that Kirk Cousins have, I like that much more than Zach Wilson. Rashad Bateman or Michael Pittman. Either or. I don't think you can really miss, but if I had to choose, if you're making me choose, you're holding a gun to my head, I'll probably choose Rashad Bateman in his matchup. I like that one just a bit more. Michael Thomas or Brandon Ayuk? Brandon Ayuk is the one for me. I know you're going to be shocked hearing that, but I still like Brandon Ayuk today, even in the wet conditions. I like any 49ers receiver against the Chicago Bears. Cam, what you got?
Got a hot one coming in. That's a hot take we need from you.
Uh-oh.
Mooney or Metcalf? That's from Fear Sick on YouTube.
Mooney or Metcalf? I like DK Metcalf, and I think people are too low on him this season. I know Denver's defense is absolutely studly, but he's still DK Metcalf, and he's nowhere even close to Darnell Mooney in that category. So DK Metcalf is the one for me. Cam, thanks for keeping me honest there. As we move forward down the list, you have some good 3 o'clock games as well. I'm going to skip the Jaguars and Commanders. Nothing too crazy in that matchup for me. Packers-Vikings is a good one. As I said, Robert Tonyan will play, no Alan Lazard, which means you have Sammy Watkins. You have Randall Cobb, which is a sneaky play there as well. My favorite Vikings sleeper is Irv Smith Jr., despite new Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell's scheme, which isn't super friendly toward tight ends. I still expect him to get some red zone production, and he may come away with a touchdown today. So keep an eye on Irv Smith, especially in DFS lineups. Giants-Titans, nothing crazy here. I like Austin Hooper. New York gave up the 13th fewest fantasy points to tight ends last season, and Austin Hooper and Ryan Tannehill have apparently had some very good connection over there in Tennessee. Saquon is in a tough spot. He's facing off against the Titans defense that allowed the 2nd fewest rushing yards and fantasy points to running backs. So even though he'll get fed the rock, he's still a dicey play this week, but he's a must start. He's one of the top running backs in the league. Raiders Chargers. I mean, this is going to be an awesome matchup to watch for anybody, whether you have fantasy implications or not. Los Angeles gave up the 4th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, 2nd most fantasy points to tight end. Las Vegas gave up the 5th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, gave up the 8th most fantasy points to running backs. Makes Josh Jacobs a fun one for me this week, makes Mike Williams another fun one for me this week. And Mike Williams, he finally put it all together in 2021. He set career highs, and he's just going to keep thriving with Justin Herbert at the helm. Chiefs Cardinals, Zach Ertz could see significant target volume for the Cardinals if he's cleared. Now, keep that in mind. If not, you got Marquise Brown. That's about it. Rondale Moore's out and no DeAndre Hopkins. I love Juju Smith-Schuster today. The Cardinals allowed the most receiving touchdowns and 4th most fantasy points to NFL wide receivers in 2021. He had 97 receptions and 9 touchdowns in his last healthy season. Bucks Cowboys, Chris Godwin is playing. Keep that in mind. Tony Pollard has some interesting flex value for me. He averaged 5.5 yards per carry last season. And then Monday Night Football. Broncos, Seahawks. The Seahawks allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to the running back position in 2021. They allowed 10 different running backs to have 20-plus fantasy points per day. Keep that in mind when you start Rashad Penny. One last start sit question as we go out here. Full point PPR. Pick 1, Raheem Mostert, Antonio Gibson, Elijah Moore, James Robinson, Antonio Gibson. That's it. That's your update. Enjoy NFL kickoff. It's Sunday. And there's many things a man can do with his time, but none are better than this. God bless you, and God bless fantasy football.